The first crack sounded like a gunshot. Not thunder, not a branch snapping, not a transformer blowing somewhere down the road. Concrete, a sharp, brutal sound, like something under pressure had finally decided it was done pretending. For half a second, the whole street went still in my head. Then the storm came back louder than before. Rain slammed the rooftops. Gutters overflowed in sheets. Wind tore through Willow Creek Estates like it had a personal grudge against every polished mailbox, every trimmed hedge, every fake little promise this neighborhood had been selling itself for years. And I stood on my porch dry, boots planted on solid concrete, coffee untouched in my hand. Watching the exact future I warned them about arrive, right on schedule. Across the street, Linda Whitmore tried to run through what used to be her front lawn. Only it was not a lawn anymore. It was a moving strip of brown water, cutting across the grass in a hard diagonal line, carrying mulch, leaves, and little pieces of decorative bark she probably paid too much for. Her heel disappeared in the mud. Her arm windmilled. She caught herself on a mailbox, then looked up at me like I had done this to her with my bare hands. 3 minutes earlier, she had been smiling. Not nervous smiling, not polite smiling. That smug, glossy, HOA president smile people where when they think the neighborhood is their stage and everyone else is just background decoration. She had stood under a white event canopy in the middle of an emergency community meeting, one hand on her clipboard, the other pointed straight at my flood wall, calling it an eyesore in front of half the subdivision. She said it looked industrial. She said it looked hostile. She said it lowered the aesthetic value of the street. Then she laughed, and the others laughed too. Quiet first, then louder once they realized she wanted them to. Now the canopy was gone, blown halfway down the block, twisted, collapsed, one leg broken, white fabric plastered against the pavement and flapping in the wind like a surrender flag nobody wanted to claim. Funny how fast dignity falls apart in the rain. The air had warned me all afternoon. Heavy, dense, pressing against the lungs. The kind of pressure you feel in your bones if you've spent enough time around land, water, and bad engineering. Most people only notice a storm when the sky turns dark. I notice it when the smell changes. It's soil, cut grass, ozone, that metallic edge in the air that says something is about to fail. And the truth is, none of this surprised me, because water does not care about neighborhood standards. It does not care about HOA bylaws. It does not care whether your retaining wall is visually harmonious with the development vision. It does not care what color your trim is, whether your fence is approved, or whether your hydrangeas line up with the seasonal planting guidelines Linda likes to email in bold. Water has one loyalty: gravity. That is it. It goes where the land tells it to go. And I knew this land better than anyone on this street. I knew where the old runoff channel used to cut before the developers buried it. I knew which section of soil compacted too hard after grading. I knew where the slope flattened just enough to create false confidence, and where it dipped again just enough to become dangerous when the rainfall came too fast. Most of all, I knew what they had done. They did not solve the drainage issue. They staged it. They smoothed it, hid it, redirected it, made it look clean, made it photograph well, made it easy to sell to people who think neat curb lines and decorative stone entry signs mean the land has been tamed. It had not. It had just been insulted. So I built the wall, not to challenge the storm, not to make a statement, the way Linda kept telling people, and definitely not for them. I built it because when the first real storm hit, I knew the water would come looking for the path they had erased. And if it could not take the old path, it would take the next lowest one. Mine. That was the first thing I saw when I moved into Willow Creek Estates. Not the clubhouse, not the fountain out front, not the slogans on the welcome packet about elegance, community, and modern living. I saw grading. I saw the way the curbs had been poured too aggressively on the east side. I saw the shallow crown in the road that looked harmless in dry weather, but would turn into a channel under stress. I saw fresh topsoil spread where old flow lines used to be. I saw a development pretending flatness where the land had never truly been flat. It was a Tuesday morning. Dry sun, sprinklers ticking, somebody jogging with expensive headphones, somebody else walking a dog that looked better groomed than most men I know. I was at the back edge of my lot, following the property line when I noticed the new curb work near the bend in the street. Clean concrete. Sharp edge. Professionally finished. Wrong. I crouched down and ran my fingers through the dirt near the lower grade behind my fence. Loose. Freshly disturbed. Poor absorption. The kind of surface that behaves fine in a gentle rain and completely betrays you in a hard one. Then I looked up, and there it was. The line. Invisible to most people. Obvious to anyone who has ever studied runoff seriously. A redirected water path that would collect force uphill, accelerate at the bend, overwhelm the first drain line, and then spill toward the lowest receiving point in the subdivision. My backyard. Once I saw it, I could not unsee it. I went home, pulled up the weather history for the area, then the projected seasonal storm data, then the parcel surveys, then older topographic record from before the subdivision existed. Side by side, it was worse than I thought. The original land had a natural drainage corridor. Not huge, not dramatic, but enough. A shallow channel that gave heavy runoff somewhere to go before any of these houses existed. The developers filled it. Then they softened the terrain. Then they redirected the street flow. Then they installed drains sized for average behavior. Average behavior. That phrase gets people hurt. Because average is what works when conditions are polite. Storms are rarely polite. So I did what I thought any reasonable person would do. I went to the HOA. I brought maps. I brought diagrams. Rainfall projections. Drainage illustrations. Cross-section sketches. I kept the language simple. No lecture. No attitude. Just cause and effect. I told them this road would channel water. Faster than they expected. I told them a drain near the bend would clog under debris load. I told them once that happened, the overflow would not spread harmlessly across open land because the open land no longer existed the way it used to. I even told them where the first failure would happen. That got a few people's attention. One board member leaned in. A man in a blue quarter zip asked whether I thought the grading contractor had missed something. Another woman frowned at the printouts and asked what kind of storm it would take. For one small moment, I thought maybe logic still had a pulse in that room. Then Linda leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, ankles neatly aligned. The same expression people wear when they have already decided the answer before the question is finished. She thanked me for my concern. That was her first move. Always. Thank you for your concern. It sounds respectful. It means dismissed. Then she explained that the development had passed all code inspections, that the drainage system had been professionally engineered, that the community had been carefully planned for both function and visual continuity. Visual continuity. That was when I knew we were done. Because when someone says visual continuity in a conversation about flood risk, you're no longer discussing reality. You're discussing branding. I tried one more time. I said code minimum is not the same thing as storm resilience. Her smile never moved. She said the board appreciated my passion, but there was no need for alarm. The systems in place were modern, compliant, and optimized. Optimized. Another favorite word of people who trust paperwork more than physics. I went home that evening and stopped trying to convince them. That is not surrender. That is triage. There comes a point where explanation becomes performance. And I have no interest in performing for people who think nature needs approval before it acts. So I worked. I pulled the old survey overlays again, measured the drop from the upper lots to the rear fence line, checked the load estimates for projected runoff under concentrated storm entry, recalculated with block drain assumptions, then did it again with reduced absorption values because the soil composition in the recent grading zone was even worse than I first guessed. Every version of the math led to the same conclusion. If I did nothing, my backyard would become the receiving basin for their design mistake. If I built correctly, the water would be forced to keep moving, not disappear. Moving. That distinction matters. I did not create a flood. I denied a shortcut. The foundation took 3 full days. The excavation had to go deeper than a decorative retaining feature because that is not what I was building. I was not building landscaping. I was building resistance. Steel reinforcement. Anchored sections. Compacted base. Drain-resistant footing. Interlock block work tied into a reinforced spine. Nothing flashy. No ornament. No attempt to make it pretty. Pretty was never the assignment. reliable was. A couple neighbors slowed down while walking their dogs and asked what it was. I said, protection. They smiled the way people smile when they think you are being dramatic without realizing they are about to become an example. By the second week, the wall was clearly visible from the street. Not huge, not ridiculous, but unmistakable. And that is when Linda showed up for the first time. I remember the sound of her heels on my driveway more than her voice at first. Clean, sharp clicks. Confident. Rhythmic. The sound of somebody who assumes every surface exists to support her entrance. She stopped in front of the wall and just stared at it. Then she took out a clipboard. Of course she did. She tapped the edge of the clipboard against the concrete block. A hard little plastic knock. Testing it, maybe, or trying to make it seem less serious by reducing it to an object she could inspect. It did not move. Something in her face tightened. Just a fraction. But enough. She tilted her head and said, "It's ugly. Not illegal. Not unsafe. Not unpermitted. Ugly." Like that settled it. She went on for almost 2 full minutes about neighborhood harmony, open visual lines, curb appeal, and the tone it set for the rest of the community. The tone, as if rainwater checks for tone before entering a property. Then she handed me a printed notice. Official letterhead. Compliance violation. 14 days to remove what the board called an unauthorized exterior structure inconsistent with community design standards. I read it once, folded it, put it in my back pocket, did not say a word. That bothered her more than arguing would have. You could see it. Silence is irritating to people who expect resistance. They want something to push against, something to dominate, something to reinterpret later as hostility. I gave her nothing. Finally, she asked, "So you're refusing to comply?" I looked at the wall, then at the street, then back at her, and I said, "I'm refusing to flood." That landed, not because she understood it, because she did not, and not understanding something often feels, to people like Linda, like a personal insult. She left with that same polished smile, but sat looser on her face than before. The next few days were strangely calm. Clear skies, dry heat, lawnmowers in the distance, kids riding bikes, delivery trucks coming and going. The whole neighborhood continuing its little theater of order. But every evening I checked the forecast. Pressure was dropping across the region. The storm band out west widened. Color deepened on radar. The projected totals looked moderate if you were lazy, dangerous if you were not. The problem was never going to be total rainfall alone. It was rate. How fast? How concentrated? How much in too little time? That is how design systems fail. Not always because they are weak, but because they're efficient right up until the second they are overwhelmed. I reinforced every seam, checked every anchor, sealed every vulnerable joint. Because when water comes with force, it does not politely test your work. It reveals your shortcuts. On the 10th day, Linda came back. This time she brought 2 board members with her. One of them was the man in the blue quarter zip from the first meeting. The other was a wiry guy with rimless glasses and the nervous energy of someone who likes rules mostly because he would be lost without them. Their shoes crunched over the gravel. They stopped just short of the driveway edge like they were approaching a scene that might become unpleasant. Linda held the clipboard again. She said I had 4 days left. After that, daily fines would begin. Then legal review. Then, if necessary, force compliance action through the association's attorney. The wiry guy nodded while she spoke, which told me he probably repeated her opinions in private and called it leadership. I listened. Then I looked past them, straight to the bend in the road. 50 yards away, maybe a little more. Even dry, I could see it. The subtle angle, the acceleration point, the place where the street would carry speed the moment the water volume rose past what those drains could manage. I finally said what I had been saying from the start. You should be more worried about your drainage than my wall. Linda laughed. Not a full laugh. More like a clipped little burst of disbelief. The kind that says, I can't believe you're still doing this. She reminded me the drainage had been engineered by professionals. Signed off. Approved. Installed to spec. I nodded. Then I said, that won't matter when the first drain chokes. That shut down the quarter zip guy for a second. He glanced toward the road. Linda noticed. That annoyed her. So she sharpened her tone and said this was a planned community, not a rural floodplain. that systems were in place. Safeguards had been considered. Experts had done their work. Planned community. There was again that faith in the plan. People love plans. Plans make them feel insulated, protected, smarter than uncertainty. But a plan that ignores the land is just arrogance with paperwork. As they turned to leave, Linda threw one last line over her shoulder. Some people just refused to adapt. I almost smiled, because I had adapted. I was the only one who had. The storm rolled in 2 nights later. And when that first real crack split through the evening, when the water hit the street, met my wall, and turned away from my property like it had remembered an older map, that was the moment Willow Creek Estates stopped being a brochure and started becoming a lesson. The first real wave did not announce itself. It arrived. Sudden, heavy, relentless. Rain did not fall anymore, it attacked. Sheets of water slammed into rooftops hard enough to bounce back into the air. Gutters filled in seconds, then spilled over like they had never been designed to hold anything more than decoration. Wind cut through the street in sharp bursts, shifting direction just enough to make everything feel unstable. And for the first few minutes, everything looked fine. That is the dangerous part. Water flowed neatly along the curbs. Clean lines. Predictable movement. Exactly the way Linda had described it in those meetings. Exactly the way the plans said it would behave. People stepped outside. Phones came out. A few neighbors even smiled like this was just a strong rain. Something to record, something to post later with captions about crazy weather and unexpected storms. I stayed where I was, because I knew what came after the illusion. The flow thickened. Not dramatically at first, just enough. Thin streams turned into heavier lines. The speed increased. Small debris began to move with it. Leaves, twigs, pieces of mulch, anything light enough to get caught in the current. And that is when the system started to change. Not fail yet. Shift. Because debris is what separates design from reality. A system works perfectly until something interferes. And something always interferes. I watched the first drain near the bend. The exact one I pointed out weeks ago. Water hit it cleanly at first. Then harder. Then with debris. Then with force. The intake slowed. Then it hesitated. Then it clogged. You could not hear it over the rain. But you could see it. Water did not disappear anymore. It stacked. That is the moment people always miss. They think failure is loud. It is not. It is quiet. It is when water stops going away. The level rose. 1 inch. Then another. The curb line blurred. Then disappeared. What had been a controlled channel became a moving sheet. No eggies. No boundaries. Just direction. And direction always leads somewhere. Across the street, a man stepped off his porch and into ankle-deep water without realizing it would not stop there. He looked down, confused, like the ground had betrayed him personally. Another neighbor crouched near the drain, trying to clear it with his hands. He pulled up leaves, mud, something plastic. The water surged harder around his fingers, like it was offended by the interruption. It did not help. It never helps once it reaches that point, because the system is no longer in control. Gravity is. The water reached the edge of my property and hit the wall. The sound changed instantly. Not louder, deeper, a continuous rush instead of scattered impact. Like a river finding resistance. It pushed, then split, cleanly. One stream redirected along the reinforced edge. The other slowed, just enough to hesitate before finding another path. That hesitation, that is everything, because water does not stop. It recalculates. It searches. It adapts faster than anything built to control it. And now, the lowest point was no longer behind my house. It was the street, and everything connected to it. I saw the realization begin, not in Linda first, in the crowd, because crowds understand danger before leaders admit it. People stopped filming, stopped smiling, stopped treating it like weather. Now, they were watching, measuring, comparing. The water climbed higher, mid-calf, then knee. The slope of the street began to reveal itself in motion, not in shape. The flow accelerated past the bend, exactly where I said it would, pushing volume downhill faster than the remaining drains could handle. And once one section overloads, Everything downstream inherits the problem. A mailbox tilted, just slightly, then leaned further as the soil around it softened. A trash bin tipped and got caught in the current, rotating slowly before drifting sideways and blocking part of the flow. That made it worse. It always does. Because obstruction does not stop water. It multiplies it. Across the street, Linda finally moved. Not walked. Moved. Fast, controlled steps at first. Then quicker. Then uneven as the water resisted her balance. Her shoes were gone. Hair soaked flat against her face. Clipboard nowhere in sight. That part was almost poetic. She reached the edge of my property and stopped because the difference was immediate. Violent in contrast. Water everywhere behind her. Dry ground in front of her. A line. Clean. Absolute. Unarguable. She stepped closer. Just one more step. And the water stopped touching her. Not because the storm had changed. Because the path had. She looked down. Then up at me. And for the first time since I met her, she did not have a prepared expression. What did you do? No ton. No control. Just a question. I answered the same way I had weeks ago. Nothing to the storm. That did not satisfy her. Why is it moving like this? Behind her, someone shouted. Another voice answered. A car alarm started somewhere down the block, its sound warped by the rain and the water. I kept my voice steady. It's not moving differently. I pointed toward the street. You just changed where it goes. She shook her head. Not disagreement. Rejection. Because understanding something like that means accepting everything that led to it. And that is heavier than most people expect. The water kept rising. It reached the base of the first garage door. Then another. Thin lines began to creep inward along the edges where rubber seals met concrete. That is how it enters. Not dramatic. Quiet. Persistent. Someone yelled for help. Another neighbor dragged a storage bin across their driveway. Tried to lift it higher, slipping twice before managing to get it onto a step. People started moving faster. Not coordinated. Not organized. Just urgent. Because urgency does not need permission. It overrides everything. Linda turned halfway back toward the street. Then toward me again. What happens now? That question landed differently. Because it was not about control anymore. It was about outcome. I did not answer immediately. Because she already knew. She just needed to hear it from somewhere outside herself. The system's overloaded. I kept it simple. It won't recover until the flow drops. Her eyes moved across the street, tracking the water, measuring something she had never needed to measure before. How long? That depends. I'll let a second pass. On things you didn't plan for. That hit. Not like an insult. Like weight. Behind her, the water reached another level. Higher. Faster. A garage door jerked halfway open, then stopped, the motor struggling against pressure from the outside. Someone inside shouted. The door shook, then held. Barely. That is where control ends. Not in meetings. Not in policies. At resistance. When something pushes back harder than your system was designed to handle. Linda stepped closer to the wall. Her hand hovered just above it. Like touching it might explain it. Can you open it? That question told me everything. She still thought in terms of control. Of mechanisms. Of options. There's nothing to open. I shook my head. It's solid. Her jaw tightened. Then released. Because frustration needs somewhere to go. And there was nowhere left to direct it. Behind her, neighbors were lifting furniture. Carrying boxes. Dragging anything they could salvage away from ground level. Voices overlapped. Instructions. Questions. Blame. All of it mixing into a noise that had no direction, no structure. Just reaction. Every few seconds, someone looked toward me. Not because I had authority. Because I had an outcome. Dry ground. Stability. Proof. And proof is louder than any explanation. Linda turned slowly. Took an entire street. From the bend, to the lower row of houses, to the places where water had already begun pooling deeper than anyone expected. This was not one problem. It was all connected. One design, one decision, repeating itself house after house. She turned back to me. Why didn't you make them listen? There it was. The shift. From authority to responsibility. I considered answering with everything I had done. The meetings, the data, the warnings. But none of that mattered anymore. So I gave her the only answer that still applied. I did. That was it. No defense. No elaboration. Just truth. Behind her, the water surged again. Stronger this time. Carrying pieces of someone's yard furniture. A plastic planter. Something that used to be decorative, now reduced to debris. And in that moment, something in her expression broke. Not visibly. Not dramatically. Just changed. Control left. Consequence took its place. The storm intensified again. Harder rain. Thicker drops. The kind that hit with weight, not just volume. And the street stopped being a street. It became movement. Continuous. Unavoidable. And the worst part, it was not done. By the time the street became a river, nobody was pretending anymore. No one cared about curb appeal. No one cared about symmetry. No one cared whether my wall matched the neighborhood aesthetic. Those words had all drowned before the houses did. The rain kept hammering down. Not wild anymore. Not theatrical. Just steady. Merciless. Heavy enough to erase every false comfort people had been holding on to since the first drop hit. The water spread from yard to yard until individual properties stopped looking separate. Fences disappeared at the base. Garden borders vanished. Decorative stone beds turned into murky patches under moving brown water. Everything connected. That is what people forget. They think poor decisions stay isolated. They do not. They travel. They move. They reach the next person, and the next, until the whole system is carrying the price. A long car horn blared somewhere down the block. Not a warning. Panic. A dark SUV sat half-crooked near the curb, water already high around the tires. The driver tried to reverse. The wheels spun. Spray kicked up. The vehicle shifted an inch, maybe two, then stopped like the street itself had decided to keep it. A man jumped out, water hitting above his shins now, and started wading toward his garage with 2 plastic bins tucked under his arms like that tiny act of saving something would keep the night from becoming what it already was. It would not. Across from me, one of the garage doors finally gave up its illusion of being sealed. Water pushed through the bottom edge in a thin line, then a thicker one. Then it came in fast, not exploding, not bursting, invading, the way water always does. Patient, quiet, absolute. Someone inside shouted a name I could not make out. Another voice answered from deeper in the house. Hi. Frantic. The motor on the door whined again, then stopped. And just like that, the home was no longer defending itself. It was enduring. Linda heard it too. She turned so quickly her wet hair slapped against her cheek. For 1 second, she looked like she might run back into the street, like instinct was trying to drag her toward the damage she still believed she should be able to manage. But then she looked down, at the water, at the depth, at the speed, at the fact that her own neighborhood had become something she could not cross without risk. That stopped her. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The understanding that this situation no longer belonged to language. There was no policy for this. No meeting procedure. No compliance notice. No scripted tone of authority to smooth over what reality was doing right in front of her. She looked at me again. Different this time. No accusation in it. No outright. Just the hollowed-out stare of someone standing in the wreckage of certainty. You knew. Her voice was barely above the rain. Not a question. I nodded once. Yes. She swallowed hard. The street behind her surged with another rush of runoff from uphill, forcing the current sideways before it wrapped around a mailbox and pushed deeper into the lower row of homes. Her eyes followed it, then came back to the wall, then to the dry concrete behind me. It is strange what people notice when panic burns off. Not the big thing first. The small thing. My porch rug, still dry. The potted plant near the step, untouched. The bottom edge of my garage door, clean. A straight line separating outcome from consequence. That line did more to convince the neighborhood than any map I had laid on a table. 2 neighbors came closer from down the street. A couple in rain jackets, soaked through anyway. Their expressions had that blank urgency people wear when they're trying to stay functional for 5 minutes longer than their nerve can handle. The husband looked at the wall, then at me. You built this for the flood? I answered without moving. I built it for the direction. He frowned at first. Then he understood enough. Not all of it. Enough. His wife asked if the water would keep rising. Yes, I said. For a while. That landed hard. Because people can endure almost anything for a moment. What breaks them is duration. The thought that this is not the worst second yet. That worst may still be coming. The couple exchanged a look and hurried away, shouting to someone farther down the block to get things higher. Linda stayed where she was. Maybe because she did not know where else to go. Maybe because leaving would have meant accepting that there was nothing left for her to direct. Or maybe because the wall had become the only honest thing in the neighborhood. I could feel the pressure against the other side of it. Constant. Heavy. Controlled only because it had been designed for force instead of appearance. A few feet to my left, water rushed along the reinforced edge and continued down the street, seeking the next available drop, the next weak point, the next place people had trusted design more than terrain. That is the part nobody likes hearing. The water was always going somewhere. My wall did not create that truth. It exposed it. Somewhere behind Linda, glass shattered. Heads turned. A basement window on one of the lower houses had given way under pressure. Not completely. Just enough for a dark pulse of water to shove inward. The sound that followed was worse than the glass. A woman screaming from inside the house. Not long. Just one raw burst of helpless anger. Then movement. Fast. Chaotic. People sloshing toward the place. Someone yelling to cut the power. Someone else shouting for towels like towels still belonged in this story. Linda flinched. That was the first visible crack in her composure. Real composure, I mean. Not the polished kind. Her shoulders dropped. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Her breathing changed. Shallower. Faster. She was not just watching damage anymore. She was hearing consequence. That is different. Seeing can still be abstract. Hearing makes it enter the body. She said my name then. Not loudly. Just once. I looked at her. I was trying to protect the neighborhood. There was no arrogance left in it. No defense. Just a ruined sentence from someone realizing too late that intention does not outrank reality. I believed her. That was the tragedy. People like Linda are not always villains in their own minds. Most of the time, they're just loyal to the wrong things. Image, order, presentation. The illusion that control is the same thing as understanding. So I answered honestly. You were protecting the look of it. She closed her eyes for a second. Rain slid down her face. When she opened them again, she did not argue. Because she knew. Maybe not weeks ago. But now, yes. Now she knew. The storm kept pressing. The flow stayed high. Houses farther down the grade were taking the worst of it now, each one adding new fear to the air. Porch lights flickered through the rain. Doors opened and shut. Voices echoed. Engines failed. Alarms chirped and died. And through all of it, my side remained still. Not untouched by weather. Untouched by the mistake. That distinction matters. Time stretched strange after that. Storm minutes do not move like normal ones. They drag. They smear. They make every sound feel important. At some point, Linda stepped fully onto the dry strip near my wall. Just one foot at first, then the other. She did not ask permission. She did not need to. The water was high enough now that pride had become too expensive. We stood there in silence for several seconds, looking out at what Willow Creek Estates really was when the branding washed off. Not elegant, not modern, not optimized. Just land. Cut. Filled. Redirected. Sold. And now, remembered. The rain eventually eased. Not ended. Eased. Enough for the roar to soften into separate sounds again. Water slapping against siding. Distant shouting. A dog barking from inside a house. The low hum of a generator somewhere up the road. That quieter phase is when damage becomes visible in a different way. Not dramatic. Certain. You begin noticing how long the water stays. How it does not hurry away just because the sky is getting lighter. How pooled areas remain pooled. How the overworked drains still cannot catch up. How soaked ground gives nothing back once it has taken too much. Linda looked down the street and asked very quietly, "How long until it goes down?" I answered the same way I answer most things when honesty matters more than comfort. Longer than they think. She nodded. No protest. No correction. Just acceptance. The kind that arrives after the argument dies. By dawn, the rain was gone. Cloud cover had thinned. Pale lights spread across the neighborhood in a flat gray wash that made everything look colder than it had overnight. The water had receded some, but not enough to hide what had happened. Mudlines marked garage walls. Debris clung to shrubs. Trash cans lay on their sides. One fence panel farther down had buckled outward and stayed that way, like the whole street had exhaled too hard. I stepped out with a fresh cup of coffee and walked the length of the wall. Not to inspect it. I knew it had held. I walked because aftermath deserves witness. Doors were open across the street. Not wide, just enough to air out what could be aired out. People moved slowly now, like sleep had not found them and morning had arrived anyway. Some carried wet boxes. Some just stood and stared at their own driveways, as if the water might return if they looked away. No one laughed. No one pointed at the wall. No one mentioned aesthetics. Linda stood near the same place she had stood in the dark. Only now she looked smaller. No clipboard. No posture. No performance. Just a woman in yesterday's clothes, dried rain stiff in the fabric, looking at the result of decisions she had once delivered with complete confidence. When she noticed me, she did not come closer right away. She just gave one small nod. I returned it. That was enough. Not forgiveness. Not friendship. Recognition. I kept walking to the end of my property and turned back. And there it was. The whole lesson in one frame. My side dry. Their side marked. Only a few feet apart. That is what people never believe until they see it. How small the difference can be between safety and loss. How ordinary it looks. How it often comes down to one decision made early, one warning respected,